The reason I got into running was not really my own doing. It wasn't something I wanted to do myself per se. I actually got into running because of a girl. There was this girl I was dating in high school, and I had asked her what her plans were for the weekend because I wanted to spend time with her, and she said, "Oh, I'm running a half marathon." And I was like, "What's that?" What's a half marathon? She explained to me it was a 13.1 mile race. And I thought about it and I was like, I think I could pull this off. I was a wrestler in high school, and I had learned a lot about mental grit and pushing through, and I considered myself an athlete. I was not training for the race, and she pointed this out. She was like, the race is in 2, 3 days and you don't run. So, do you think you can do it? And I was like, of course, like, yeah, I'm trying to impress this girl. I'm like, of course I'll be able to do it. Let me, I'll sign up and we can run it together. And the night before, I was texting her, and I said, I'm going to go for a 2 mile run just to test it out and see how I do on that. And she's like, don't do it. Don't waste your energy. And despite what she was saying, I still went for that 2 mile run because I was mentally trying to lock into what running was like. The next day, we wake up super early, get on the bus together, drive to the start of the race, and we, at some point, the gun goes off and we're running. I was with her for about a quarter mile, half mile, and then she was like, you should push yourself. Like, don't wait for me. We went back and forth. I was like, I did this because I wanted to spend time with you. And then she was like, no, but like, do your best. And so I took off. I felt amazing for the first 5K. 4 miles in, it's great. 5 miles, I'm doing fine. 6 and 7, those 6 and 7 miles is where I really, really fell apart. I, started bonking really hard because I did not eat anything during this race. I didn't know what gels were at the time. I didn't know about how you need to fuel yourself for longer runs. And so I basically walked, ran all the way to the finish. It was something like 2 hours, 20 minutes. It wasn't too impressive at the time, but I finished. And then I waited for the girl I was dating, and then she, finished, and we celebrated and moved on with her life. Well, when her and I broke up, I didn't have a reason to run anymore. There wasn't like a calling for it per se. And so it went another year or two before my mom messaged me and said, hey, there's a half marathon this weekend. You should run it. You should try and kind of replace or get some new memories of what running is to you. Maybe replace those memories of running with that girl I was no longer dating. Again, this race was 2-3 days. It might have been a Wednesday, and the race was on Saturday. And so I wasn't really training. I think I was running a little bit, but I wasn't like training for a half marathon. I was probably only doing 2 miles at most, or maybe 3 miles if I ever went for a run, just for general health. Well, my mom got me. I signed up for the race, and I went and ran it. I think I got maybe it was an hour 48 minutes for this half marathon. And when I was finishing the race and looking at my results, I realized something. I realized in my age group I was like 30th place or 40th place because my age group was competitive. I was 20 at the time, and I think the age group was like 19 to 24, which is where all the college students are, cross-country kids. And as a competitive person, I was like, damn, like I'm in 40th place. What could I do to get better? I had this key realization that if I was able to run this half marathon at a decent time without any training, what would my life look like? What would running look like if I gave it my all? And so as a competitive person, I was trying to pick, what do I pursue? A half marathon, marathon. And at the time, I had been reading David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me book, so I started to understand what ultra marathons were and these crazy distances. And so the thought I had was, well, if I'm getting demolished in my age group at half marathons, I wonder if anyone my age is running ultras. And so this is where my ultra journey began. That was January when this conversation in my head and this race happened. And I decided I wanted to pursue 100-mile races. So I found a race that was about 8 months later in September. It was a 102-mile race last one standing here in St. George, Utah. And so I trained for this race all throughout the summer. I did a 54-mile long run leading up to it. And at the race, I only made it 66 miles. And I know I say that like it's only 66 miles, but in my mind, I was going for the full 100. So that was a failure to me. But at the end of the day, I went from 13 miles in January to my longest run being 66 miles in September that year. And so after I failed and pulled out of that race, I was disappointed and at the same time inspired, because I thought, well, this was 8 months of training. If I commit to another year, what would this 100-mile race look like next time? And so I gave it my all throughout the year. I was running, I was biking, strength training, stretching, learning about nutrition, watching documentaries. And so a year later in 2021, I finished the 100-mile race, and actually went on to win it the fall the year after that. So I did a 100-mile race before my first official marathon. Because I was so fixated on this 100-mile race, I, didn't even think to sign up for a marathon or another half marathon. And it was quite interesting because I believe it was 2022, I ran a sub-3 hour marathon. And there was something really cool that happened mentally for me. Because I had ran 100 miles officially, when I was training for a marathon, I was like, it's only 26.2 miles. I know that's funny that it's only 26 miles. I mean, regardless, that's still a long run. But I had basically ran 4 marathons in a row for the 100-miler. And I learned this very key concept, and this is the point of the video, is when you push your limits, so like you set a new standard for yourself, things below that become simpler and almost easier in a sense. Because I had ran 100 miles and done that before I'd ever signed up for a marathon, when I signed up for my first marathon and I was training for it, or I was in the actual race, when I was at the half marathon point, I was like, it's 13 miles. I've done this back to back to back to back to back. I can do another 13.1 miles. And it's very valuable. I don't think as a runner you need to run 100 miles if that's not your goal. I don't think you need to jump from a 10K to a marathon, but you can. And when you do that, and when you maybe be unreasonable or do something extreme, what it does for your mental grit or your mental attitude is massive. And so I try and take this and put this into my everyday life. And you don't need to only push your limits, obviously, with running. It can be setting a new standard for yourself in the gym. If you do something unreasonable and that bar is now here, anything below that, even if it's still difficult, you mentally can understand it better because of the extreme effort you put into something else. And I think that's very valuable as an athlete or just as a human being, is if you take big risks and try something crazy, the rewards from that, even if you fail at some point, is completely worth it. And so if you want to get better at half marathons and that's your thing, I think you should run a marathon, because you now know what that feels like, and it makes the half marathon mentally, it's a little easier because your bar is so high. And so I'm all about being unreasonable and being extreme. I think that's something that helps you set yourself up for success when you go further than you need to, and then you double down on the thing you're focused on. Because now when I run a 50-miler, even though it's hard, I've done 2 50-milers in a row in a 100-mile race, and I think that's valuable. I hope that helps, and I look forward to seeing you on the trail sometime soon.